having someone that was cheering you on, like, actually matters a ton. I tell young people this all the time. Like, if you've got two choices and you've got a great boss to work for and you've got like a fine boss to work for, always take the great boss because it's going to make a difference in your career down the road.
Angie, thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Business Innovators. It's such a pleasure to have you join me. I've known about you. I've known about your company since the early days back in the 90s. So this is an exciting interview for me to do. So thanks for coming on.
Well, it's great to be here.
Well, I appreciate it. I wanted to start, when you were growing up, and were you thinking or were there influences in your life at that time which really you could think back now and really helped you form the path that you took to become an entrepreneur, to start a business?
It's a great question. I mean, I grew up in a middle class family. So like when you look at first blush, there probably wasn't. My dad was a UPS driver. My mom was a bank teller. So I didn't have business owners in my immediate family. I was the first in my immediate family to go to college. So I didn't have those kind of things. But over the years, I've always wondered, because I was like, I never thought of myself necessarily as a typical entrepreneur either, that I had the characteristics of an entrepreneur. Because I always thought like, hey, they're risk takers, they're big idea people. It's like there's just elements, and I would never use those kind of terms to describe myself. But one thing that I think has come through is kind of a perseverance and dedication to a cause that is often not the most celebrated task of an entrepreneur, but an important one, right? I mean, like starting a business is hard. And I think that element plays through. So when I think back to kind of, my younger life, I mean, those kind of skills and characteristics always were showing through in kind of how I tackled things and went after things that were important to me. So I think that might be more like in kind of looking back in the rearview mirror, the ones that might have been hints that I could be an entrepreneur someday.
It is a risk, and it's hard a lot of times, especially like you. I was really young, I think 22 when I started a business. So Angie, let me know, because, what was it that finally made you decide to say, hey, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to start this business. And, instead of this great job offer that I had, especially, being the first person in your family to graduate college, a sure thing. And, you went for it and took the risk.
Yeah. I mean, it was a very hard decision. I mean, but one thing that I think was a tipping point for me was, my relationship with Bill Osterley, I had interned for when I was in college, and he's the one that asked me to start this business with him. And, he was a great mentor. He cared about my career, and having someone that was cheering you on, like, actually matters a ton. I tell young people this all the time. Like, if you've got two choices and you've got a great boss to work for and you've got like a fine boss to work for, always take the great boss because it's going to make a difference in your career down the road. And then, ultimately, quite honestly, it was a conversation with my grandfather I had that finally just kind of sealed it for me. I mean, he said, what's the difference between being 22 and looking for a job and being 23 and looking for a job? I mean, there's nothing. I mean, I think, and Rob, you were the same way. I mean, you started a business really young. I mean, there's an element of ignorance is bliss. You don't have a lot of responsibilities. You're like, I just need, a roof over my head, but my little studio apartment is perfect. I don't care. I'm used to living in a dorm, and I need some food, but it's pretty basic. You don't have all of those adult responsibilities yet. So there is value there.
Yeah, no, it's funny. A lot like you, I had the same thoughts, and that advice from your grandfather is so true, especially for entrepreneurs today. It was much different when you were starting your business and how people looked at entrepreneurs. But what do you have to lose, whether you're 22 or 23 and hopefully don't have a family to feed? As you said, all you need is food, a roof over your head. I'd add in maybe a little beer money, But then again, so
Have a little fun.
right, you need a little fun while you're working really hard
Right.
and so many hours. And let me ask you, when you first started and you took that advice from your grandfather and as you said, really had a lot of respect for Bill and what was it like just initially for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard. I mean, I moved from Indiana to Columbus, Ohio, and I didn't know anyone in Columbus except for Bill and his family. And, so I was working long hours. I lived down the street from the office. I didn't really have any friends. I mean, plus, it was like I was doing so many things for the very first time, right? I didn't know much about running a business, but I had to kind of figure it out as I went along. So it was hard. It was very hard. And I always remind people to kind of think about what their support system is when they're going to start a business because you don't realize the personal toll that it can take on you. And in fact, after a few years, I ended up going to business school. And, when I look back on that time, I think had I not taken the break to go to business school, I probably would have left the business.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Just in thinking about that, what was it that, you went and you started this business and we all know how hard it is to get going, but what was it that made you take or want to take that break?
I was at a point, the business we were in about 4 cities at that point, and it was actually starting to kind of gain some scale. Our investors said, "Hey, let's go build out a management team. Let's get a CEO." They asked Bill to join as CEO, which was great. But for me, it was a time where I was just like, I had just been kind of pounding the pavement for so long and had experienced so many things from, I was my first professional career. I became a manager really young and I wasn't any good at it. We did an acquisition and I was like, okay, we raised money. It's like all kinds of things I was exposed to that I was just like, I'm seeing all these things are kind of flooding in, but I don't know what to do with it, right? I don't know what to do and how to kind of synthesize what I'm learning. So I just really needed a break. And, when I say a break, I mean, let's be honest, I was still doing some work while I was in business school.
I
But
figured you couldn't stay away.
exactly.
And
I was like, I'm still doing some work, but, it was a break, but it was, a really good time for me to kind of step back and kind of tackle some of those things that I had experienced and kind of be able to say, "Oh, now I get it. Now I understand more fully why we did what we did or where, because there's a little bit of me being guided without, necessarily always having all the answers. It's kind of, hey, you need to go do this or that. And by stepping back and kind of looking at business, from at school, it just gave me a chance to kind of, more fully understand and appreciate the experiences I'd had.
I want you to, even though you are a billion-dollar business, I want you to just give a little background or explanation exactly about Angie's List and what you do, so our listeners could really understand. And then I want to get back to you initially with the startup role.
Yeah, yeah. So Angie's List, which is now Angie, helps you find skilled home pros to take care of your home. So whether you're doing a kitchen remodel, putting on a new roof, fixing leaky faucets, you can turn to Angie to find out which pros in your area are highly rated and could get that job done well. And we cover hundreds of different tasks. So really anything that has to do with the home, you can't stump us.
And it's amazing because, people might be listening today and thinking, oh, well, there's, so many people in this space or competitors or ways to find these people nowadays. But when you were really starting this business, this was new. The internet was just, maybe 5-10 years. I don't even recall, but just out there. So what was that like for you being in an emerging technology and also starting this business, which really is or was more of someone tells you, hey, I got a good person for you, or how was that or what was that like?
Yeah. So when we first started, it was an offline world. So we started as a call-in service and a newsletter where people could call in and say, I'm looking for a plumber. They'd talk to me. I'd give them the names of plumbers they could use. But then a few years, the world quickly changed. The internet developed and launched. And, we had to figure out what our business would look and feel like in an online world. And, so, first step was like, okay, we need to make a website. We made a website, and, it was an email-based website where people could just join. They couldn't check the list through the website, but it quickly became our biggest driver of signups for homeowners who were joining. And so then we were like, okay, now we need to go really have a strategy around our website. Let's go build one. We built an interactive website so you could check the list online. But we had the luxury of kind of starting in an offline world and moving online, which allowed us to think about things from a bit of a different perspective, in that we kind of knew what our business was and kind of defined our brand and our voice and a lot of elements about the business before we went online. And when we went online, we had decided, like, hey, that's not going to change who we are. It's actually just going to be another channel. And albeit it became the channel, right, of how people were going to interact with us, but it helped in that decision-making process of how we were going to, help homeowners, get those jobs done well, and how to help pros grow their business, which even today is a very offline world. It's like, they might come to Angie to get a connection and to kind of get started on their project. But in the end, the work's getting done in someone's home, and that job's going well or it's not. And that's where having, kind of great pros that know how to do the work you need done is so important, because that's what's going to determine whether the customer is ultimately happy.
Do you think that decision to say, hey, we're not going to change, how we operated, or I would say maybe culture or business dynamics from the old school way of doing it with this, when everyone's like, I need a website, because so many businesses at the time were like, oh, now I don't have to go sell. I'm just going to pop up a website.
Right.
People are just going to transact. Was that a big reason for the success, would you say, of Angie's List at the time, now Angie?
Yeah, I think it helped us kind of set a foundation for what was important, because people will ask, kind of like, hey, back then, what would you define as kind of that offering? And it was like, hey, we're going to help you find good pros, and, we're going to have a fair system for how we're going to collect reviews. Like these elements that were super important back then, I would answer the same way today, right? It's like, hey, it's about the quality of the pro. It's about consumers being able to share their feedback. It's about homeowners finding good pros. Those are the same things. They've changed. Absolutely, they've changed and you evolve. We've been at this 30 years, but those kind of bedrocks are the same.
I love your story too. I had read somewhere, I don't recall when, but back in the day, that you were more personality-wise introverted. And, usually you think of an entrepreneur as this person who's out there, selling. And I want to ask you, what was that like? Because at the beginning, you were offline, you were having to go door to door, which is like the most hardcore sales there is.
Exactly.
Like, it's like jumping into the pool, like in the deep
The
end.
rite of passage.
What was that like for you, and how did that change you?
Yeah, I am very introverted, and and to this day, I have to think about ways that, I can balance and kind of be comfortable in a world that might require me to, kind of be much more outgoing, etc. Those early days going door to door, it was hard. It was miserable, quite honestly. Back to the things that made me like it's hard work, that probably was one of them. But I treated it like a math problem. It was like, I need to knock on so many doors. If I talk to so many people, then I will sign up so many new members. I would just kind of approach the problem very, very analytically and break it down. And quite honestly, yeah, we decided that this would never be the driver for the business. I was never going to be a salesperson, but it taught me a lot about myself and kind of how to kind of tackle problems and do things that I may not enjoy, and also taught me a lot about the business. Right, I'm interacting with a lot of people, getting to have those conversations, and that's why I would encourage leaders, to be thinking about ways that they can kind of put themselves, kind of in the shoes of the frontline team, the people that are actually talking to your customers, because you learn so much. You learn so much and you pick up nuances that you may not have realized. And it's a great learning experience, and that's never going to show up in a spreadsheet.
Yeah, I love that insight you give, and especially, we have a lot of people who listen to this show who are out there either starting new businesses or starting new jobs, and to get uncomfortable, right? And to get on the front lines. It was almost like, you doing that really kind of gave you or gave the business its start. I mean, when I think about it, if you weren't out there getting those first 1,000 clients, let's say, there would be, it could have easily have just said, it doesn't work, fold it, but you persevered. And I want you to talk a little bit about perseverance as well, especially for people in business or entrepreneurs, because you are now a 30-year-old business, right? When it's hard to imagine, but especially for your type of business and company, I'm always just amazed how you have stayed around. They've come at you from so many different businesses over the years. But Angie's List originally has really made an impact. How is that?
Yeah, and I think, that's like two things. I think perseverance, I believe, is the entrepreneurial superpower. It's most startups fail, and so, sometimes it's not always that the idea was bad, is that we just didn't stick with it long enough to kind of break through. So I think that makes a difference, but I also think you have to be willing to kind of evolve and change along the way and try new things. I think that's something that kind of all businesses can fall in the trap of kind of like, this is what's worked for us, but it doesn't mean it's what's going to work for us in the future. So how are you staying creative and keeping an entrepreneurial bent somewhere in the organization to be thinking about kind of where that next space comes? Because, if you think about, Angie in the home improvement industry, it's still vastly an offline world. I mean, it's still not unusual, for you to just say, I'm going to go ask my neighbor what plumber they used, or I look at a truck that drives down my street and like, I'm going to call that one. So there's those elements that, we always have to be thinking about, like, hey, how is it going to be, kind of down the road when the vast majority of interactions start online? At an Angie or something where you're thinking about what plumber should I have, and kind of the process that got us here may not be the process that ends up being the winner. So we always have to be thinking and kind of evolving the offering.
Another great point. And, was there a time, whether it was prior to going, to business school or coming back, where you really had to pick yourself off the mat, or the business did, where you maybe thought about, hey, this might not be for me, or this business itself might not really persevere or make it?
Yeah, there were times like that. I think there were always. I mean, I remember when we opened in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was our fourth market. It was just a hard market to break into. I mean, like one of the things that was helpful for us when we first opened was we'd usually get a little local media. We'd buy some advertising. We kind of had this little, recipe for success. And in Charlotte, we just couldn't break through. And, we thought about closing it. And then we ended up just deciding, like, hey, because our biggest expense in the business was our marketing cost. So we leaned up our marketing expense and just kind of let it grow organically for a while, pretty slow, until it finally took off. So I think there was that debate, like, do we stick with it or do we not? And we decided to stick with it, but we just reduced our investment there. And then it was probably, I'm trying to think back. I mean, we were probably 5 or 10 years into the business, and, there was a lot of competitors that were coming into the space, and they kind of looked at the problem differently than we had. We had homeowners pay, and then pros who were highly rated could advertise with us. Whereas a lot of the competitors were free to homeowners, and, pros would pay to be involved. And we kind of debated, like, hey, do we have this flipped wrong? Right. At that decision point, we decided to stay the way we were. But down the road, we ended up opening it up for free to homeowners because the world changed, right? It became a world where we used to pay for all kinds of information. Then we entered a world where information became free. And so we developed a freemium model where homeowners could check, and get pros for free. So I think those points are like, those are like everyday kind of like, I think there's
I
you
hear
gotta like,
you.
do we go or do we not go? Do we go or not go? I think that's kind of a common kind of let's check in. But don't always rest on kind of the decision you made the first time was the right one because the world changes too.
I love that. So, another point you're bringing up, especially as an innovator, and you are absolutely an innovator because originally, like one of the first, I think, if not the first, in this category, especially at the time. But, for what you just said in terms of always being able to or knowing that you need to change. Do you think that is super important as a business owner, entrepreneur, business person that you just have to, make changes to thrive?
Yeah, you absolutely do. I mean, I sometimes say like you're going to change or die, right? We were having even a team meeting yesterday, and I was like, yeah, it's just like we always should look for opportunities to test new things. It's like because you don't always get as many as you would want, and so when you get them, you got to make the most of them. So it's like I don't know. I'm just like I can't give up that, even though we're a large organization today, I can't give up that entrepreneurial kind of spirit of kind of testing and challenging the status quo.
And I want to ask you, because you said it earlier, perseverance and picking yourself off the mat, because I agree with you 1,000%. I think that is the superpower of every successful entrepreneur, and having interviewed hundreds of them, I always find that, that was, they kept going. They found themselves in a jam. I mean, crazy stories, but they kept going. And I'm just curious from your standpoint, what is it? Is it that drives you, that gives you that ability to do that? Because for so many people, it's so extremely hard to get knocked down, rejected, and get back up. But what is it? Is it something from childhood? Is it something from growing up? Is it something you learned?
Yeah.
What is it inside of Angie that gives you that superpower?
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, I think it is just a general commitment to things. Like if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. And I do think that stems from, my parents when I think about it. My dad was a UPS driver his entire career. He was committed to that business and he was committed to, kind of doing well. And I think that is an element there. It's kind of like, hey, I'm not, I said, I'd do it. I'm going to do it. I mean, there was a conversation early on in the business where I was probably at a point where I was ready to quit. And I talked to Bill and I was crying and I was like, but I didn't really talk. And he was giving me a little pep talk through the whole thing. And then, finally at the end, I was like, all I could say was, I'm not going to quit. And he's like, great, get back to work, but it's like, it's that element of just like, hey, I made a commitment, I made a promise, and I stand by my promises.
Do you recall what it was? Why you wanted to maybe quit at the
Oh,
time?
I think it was just on any given day. That was probably in the first year that I was like, I didn't sell a membership that day or something. Actually, I do know what it was. It was September of 1995. And I think we had our lowest sales month ever that month. I think we might have only signed up like 20 members, which was, not good. And I was just like, this is it. I think that combined with the fact that, you kind of come to the realization, this is not a summer job. I'm not going back to college. Like everybody was like, this is it. This is my life. That was pretty sure that was what that kind of breakdown stemmed from.
Yeah, it's funny. I could imagine, on so many days I've been there or have been there, and entrepreneurs have been there. People working for big companies have been there where, you wanted to just quit and leave, but for a reason like that. And it's interesting. You stayed, you built an incredible business. Tell me what it's like for you today being at Angie, and what it's like for you as, valuation. You're over $1 billion, from thinking back to you just going to Columbus, Ohio, right, and knocking
Yeah.
on
In my
doors.
Ford Escort with all my worldly possessions. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You're Ford Escort. You're living, just probably eating ramen noodles or
Oh,
whatever it might be. And what's it like now, though, for you
yeah.
as this person within this business and a lot of people, probably all different ages, younger people? Are you, how are you approaching that?
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of my time, so now my role is chief customer officer. I spend a lot of my time, kind of interacting with the customers, homeowners and pros, and, kind of sharing and storytelling inside the organization to help, the engineers that are building, the app. Like, how do we help them kind of understand the pain points? I'm like, and I'm, let's be honest, I'm far not long enough in my life that I've done a lot of home improvement projects.
Yeah.
I'm like the super homeowner customer. And kind of how do we kind of share and tell those stories and make sure that we are continuing to evolve to meet their needs. And so I've done a few things. I've over the years I've recently started a pro council for Angie, where we have pros that participate. I mean, they help advise our product team, help us kind of business decisions that we're making. There's a lot of things that they kind of help and interact with. And, just being able to kind of hear them and kind of understand how Angie plays a role in their business is incredibly insightful and rewarding. And then, talking to customers. I tell people in the organization all the time, I'm like, anybody wants to talk to me, just send them to me. I have office hours if they want to sign up for a 15-minute slot and talk about whatever you want. I mean, like, culturally, that, kind of sets a tone in the organization where it's just like, hey, there is no like, there's no kind of getting stuck. Sometimes people feel like they get stuck at kind of, a customer service rep kind of at a frontline person. And it's like, I'm there to support them. I'm there to support those frontline customer service folks. And, like, if there's something that I can do to help, I want to do that. And, I can help then make change if there's something that we're kind of like, hey, we do have an issue with this or that. Let's figure out how we make it better.
Do people take you up on that offer? I'm
They
just
do.
curious.
They
That's
do. They
awesome.
absolutely do. I mean, I dedicate, a couple hours a week, doing calls like that, and it's great.
Yeah. I would just think, there's always some people, which is so great that you're so open and caring, but there's people that in your young age are intimidated. This is Angie Hicks who started this incredible business. But it's so great to hear that, you still do that. And what really strikes me, is that when you were first starting out, it seems like you were going door to door. You were talking to potential customers. You were talking to suppliers. You really were listening. Not even, I hate to use the word talking because it sounds like to me what's made you successful, just one of the things, and you just mentioned it, you're still doing it 30 years later, is really listening. And how important is that, or was that, or is that for the success of Angie?
I think it helps us kind of understand. I mean, like, especially in a world where, our customers, we have lots of customers. They're small. It's not like we have kind of giant customers and you kind of build, strong relationships. But we want to treat, every home pro, that's a part of the network, just like, a partner and a lifelong customer. So the only way to do that is invest in a relationship. So, I'm a believer in kind of leading by example. I'm not going to, as I said, I'm not going to be the person that's going to rally the troops and kind of get them all jazzed up. But it's like, hey, mimic what I do. I'm like, I will, I will call, I will talk to them. I will coach you on kind of these conversations and make sure that we are learning along the way. And I think that, kind of having that accessibility in a digital world really defines and makes a difference in what the organization is.
Yeah. What advice would you give, to executives or people starting out, entrepreneurs, if you were to give advice, especially for looking back, maybe like someone like yourself, and you got advice from your grandfather about, hey, you always could do this at 23, 22, go for it. But what advice would you give to someone in potentially that same position, or maybe even older now, about a career
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of those is stay close to your customers. You're not going to look to your customers for necessarily the strategy of the business because they don't necessarily, they don't know what to ask for, right? So, they would iterate. So you want to not kind of get caught in that trap of just kind of driving that way, but staying close to your customers and making sure you get kind of an unfiltered view of kind of how things are going and kind of opportunities for that is going to help you kind of be creative and think about where you should be taking the business next. It's like, for example, NPS is a great tool for understanding kind of customer satisfaction, but does it give you enough? Does it give you enough? Like, how are you in a qualitative way thinking about supplementing kind of the data? And I love data. I love spreadsheets, but I think there's sometimes you've got to have a nice balance of quantitative and qualitative.
Yeah, no, that's a totally good point, especially, in today's world, whether you're an executive or starting a business. And, for someone who's had so much business success like yourself, w- what does a successful life and career look like to you now when you're able to, you still have plenty of time to look forward, but you've got this great past to look back on? What would something successful, mean to you?
Yeah. I mean, I think about the impact that we are making, whether it's to the community, to our customers, even to our employees, right? Like, how are we kind of helping to kind of grow them, helping them be successful? And, those are the kind of things I measure. I think sometimes people will ask, like, hey, what are your biggest accomplishments? And some people will say, hey, when we took the company public, that was the greatest thing. I'm like, that was a point, right? That was a point, but it's sometimes those, kind of relationships and kind of how you've impacted lives along the way is much more important to me than some of the financial kind of milestones that a lot of times people look at. And then when I think about, kind of what makes my career kind of successful, happy, etc., I keep things pretty simple. Like, if I am learning new things and I like the people I'm working with, then I'm happy. Because I do believe you need to enjoy what you're doing. And that because we spend way too many hours working. So be able to define what that means to you, like what helps you be happy in what you're doing, and find it. And if you don't have it, make a change.
Yeah, I agree with you so much. And it's so great to hear from someone as successful as you, talking about that, about being happy, because I think, or no, unfortunately, life goes really fast,
Yes.
from when you're that young kid, like wonder, 30 under 30 or whatever it might be to, kind of being an elder statesman in a business, talking about myself. It really does go quick. And if you don't enjoy it, and I've had trouble with that because I get locked in, focused, and I'm sure, it's been hard for you and many others in their careers. And I love that advice you gave because, like you said, if you're not enjoying it or not happy, you're you're not going to be really productive, I think, too.
Right. You're not going to be good at it.
You're going to be miserable, right?
Right.
And not be great at it. And I love the fact that you've said that. And just before I let you go, for you, well, I have two questions, but this one for you, for Angie today, for you personally, where do, not to say where do you see yourself and where do you really want to spend your time, and what do you want to do over the next few years?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm actually doing a lot of the things that I just love doing. And I've had the luxury of being able to kind of define this role a little bit for myself, which is fun. So, I get to spend a lot of time talking to customers, which gives me a lot of energy and ideas and, things like that. I've become a storyteller and a resource inside the organization where we can kind of talk through, like, how do people think about this topic or that topic? And that's a lot of fun. I mean, there's so much opportunity in our industry. It's like, this industry will eventually be online. There will, there'll be a day we'll look back and be like, oh my gosh, you used to have to call the plumber to get a plumber to come to your house. Like, which is, you still talk to him on the phone today. It's like that will change. And, being a part of that transformation is exciting. It's exciting to see how we can make, kind of home care become something that, isn't oh my gosh, something just broke. I need to fix it, right? Like turning it into it's kind of a non-event. Yeah. Looks like I got a little roof leak. That was mine, a couple of weeks ago, and it's just like, and, plumber, the roofer comes out, fixes it. It's done. All is good. And it interrupt your day, and allow you to really kind of enjoy those big projects that are just fun, whether you're redoing your backyard or things like that have been dream projects.
It must be super interesting for you. And I'm curious because of a lot of the people who, are on your site and who are the plumbers and mechanics or whatever it might be in home improvement. But how good does that feel, when they tell you, you changed my life. You built a business, and without that business, I may never have built my business because I may have been introvert. I may not have been out there marketing, talking to people. How does that happen? And how does that?
Yeah. I mean, being able to help small businesses. I mean, most home services pros, tend to be like 4 people or less. I mean, they're small businesses in your community. And to feel like we are a partner that has helped kind of take something off of their plate. When I talk to these pros, like, hey, I might be a great painter. And, for that small business, they'd like to maximize the amount of time they spend painting, but they still have to pay the bills. They still have to invoice people. They still have to find customers. They still have to do things. Like if Angie can be the partner that helps kind of take away one of those kind of non-fun tasks potentially in their world of things that they're doing so they can spend more of their time on their trade. That's what makes me, kind of most proud. And, and I hear that story from pros that have been with us for so long that are just like, hey, that's just what I do. It works and I do it. And that is incredibly rewarding and satisfying.
Yeah. I need to keep your email because you must know the best people in the world in all different areas of home improvement from who have
Well
used your
connected.
site. Yeah. So, it's like you said, people ask other people or whatever they do. And
Yeah.
thankfully for Angie, that's really what you did and you created.
Yeah.
And the question I wanted to ask you before you left is, everyone or many people know Angie, Angie's List. It's just, especially where I am at my age, growing up with it, seeing it from the beginning.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever said, "Are you Angie?" But because it's not a super common, it's unless you really read a story or whatever it might be. But has that
all
happened?
the time, all the time.
Jeez, yeah.
Quite honestly, yeah. It's especially as I was over the years, I've been in a lot of our ad campaigns and things like that. So yeah, I mean that would be the case. I mean, I still get stopped at the grocery store. It's like, which is fun. And I tell the team, I'm like, because of that, I get to interact in a very informal way with lots of our
Yeah.
customers. And, it's incredibly rewarding. And like, how do I bring that back to the team?
Any advice you just want to give or last kind of insight? You innovated an entire business category. You've done incredible things. You're still at it. The company, you still seem, passionate about it.
Yeah.
Anything I left out that you think is really important for others listening to this show who are gaining kind of that inspiration from your story?
Yeah, I mean, I think, be open to opportunities in your life and make sure that you're thinking about, kind of the people that you are working with and are in your support system and, be picky and find good people, because from good people come good ideas. And be open to kind of those doors opening, because sometimes we might have our path laid out, but in fact, somebody might see something different for us. So, don't be afraid to kind of explore those opportunities.
Well, Angie, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on Business Innovators. It was really enjoyable talking to you. And I love your story. I love what your grandfather told you. I'm glad he told you that today, or you might be a
I
consultant
might be a
somewhere.
consultant still, right? Exactly.
Punching the clock. But it sounds like you are in a much different world and helping the world, most importantly, especially with small businesses nowadays, which is just so needed in this country, especially in the United States. And, I want to thank you for that. And thank you for coming on the show.
Great. Well, thanks, Rob. It was great being here.